He was just looking for a safe place for his daughter to spend the night. Not a handout, not a miracle, just a well-lit parking garage where they wouldn't be bothered. But when the hotel manager told him to leave, he never expected the woman watching from the lobby window to step out of the shadows and change not just their night but the rest of their lives. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The beat engine of the old station wagon coughed once, a rattling, weary sound, before falling into a grudging silence. Leo Rhodes rested his forehead against the cold vinyl of the steering wheel. For a long moment, the quiet that followed was heavier than the noise had been. It was the sound of another dead end in the back seat. His 7-year-old daughter, Maya, was curled under a pile of blankets, a small island of warmth in the car's frigid interior. Her breathing was soft, and even a gentle rhythm against the backdrop of his own ragged exhale. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her face peaceful in the dim glow of the parking garage, lights her hair, a messy halo against a pillow made from a one-frau, bundled-up sweatshirt. She didn't know they were down to their last $23. She didn't know the job interview in the city had been a bust, just like the 3 before it. She didn't know that home was no longer a place with 4 walls, but the worn fabric seats of a car that smelled faintly of gasoline and stale coffee. All she knew was that this was an adventure, a road trip. Just her and Daddy, and he intended to keep it that way for as long as he could. He straightened up, running a hand over his face. The stubble on his jaw felt rough, a reminder that it had been 2 days since he'd had a proper wash. In a place with a real mirror, he looked out the windshield at the concrete pillars and the stark white lines of the parking garage. They'd chosen the Grand Zenith Hotel not because they could afford it, but because it was safe, brightly lit, patrolled by security, a place where no one would bother a man and his, quote, daughter trying to catch a few hours of sleep before the sun came up and they had to move on again. The air in the car was bitingly cold. Leo could see his breath fogging in front of him. He pulled his own thin jacket tighter, a flimsy shield against the damp chill that seeped through the car's aging seals. Maya stirred behind him, her small voice pulling him from his thoughts. Daddy, are we almost there? Leo's heart gave a familiar, painful twist. Yeah, kiddo, he said, his voice a little too rough almost. There, we're just taking a little rest stop for the night. She yawned and snuggled deeper into her nest of blankets. Okay, but can we find a place with pancakes in the morning? He forced a smile, a real one, this time, because for her, he could always find a smile. You bet $silver pancakes with extra syrup. Just for my girl. Her contented sigh was his reward, a small victory in a losing battle. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, trying to ignore the gnawing emptiness in his stomach and the louder ache in his chest. This wasn't the life he'd promised her. This wasn't the world he wanted her to know, but for tonight, in the belly of this concrete beast, under the hum of fluorescent lights, it was the best he could do. He just had to hope it was enough. Maya slept with the kind of deep, trusting peace that only children can manage, a peace that felt both like a blessing and a burden to Leo. He watched the gray ebb rise and fall of her small shoulders beneath the blankets, and felt the weight of his own exhaustion settle into his bones like a deep, unshakable, chill sleep. Wouldn't come for him. Not yet. His mind was a loud, frantic place, of Foss.com. Relentless tally of failures and dwindling options. The severance pay from the factory had run out weeks ago. The last of their savings had been eaten up by gas and cheap motel rooms, where the locks were broken and the sheets were questionable. He'd sold his wedding band last Tuesday, a quiet, painful transaction in a pawn shop that smelled of dust and desperation. He still felt its absence on his finger, a phantom weight that was now just a pale, untanned line on his skin. He scrubbed a hand over his tired eyes, trying to push back the tide of self-pity. It was a useless emotion, a luxury he couldn't afford. He had to be strong for Maya. He had to be the rock, the steady hand, the one who knew the way even when they were hopelessly lost. The thought of her was the only thing that kept him from letting the darkness swallow him whole. She was his anchor, his reason, his North Star in a sky that had gone completely black. He glanced. Around the parking garage, concrete walls painted a sterile white rows of gleaming luxury cars, parked in neat, silent lines, a testament to a world that felt impossibly far away, a world of warm beds and full refrigerators, and lives that weren't lived 1 gallon of gas at a time. He felt like a ghost, haunting a place. He didn't belong, a trespasser in a land of plenty. His stomach growled again, a low, guttural complaint. He ignored it. He'd gotten good at ignoring his own needs. Prioritizing Maya's had become second nature. She'd had the last of the sandwiches for dinner, a squashed peanut butter and jelly he'd made on the hood of the car 2 towns back. He'd told her he wasn't hungry, that he'd eaten earlier, a lie she'd accepted with the unquestioning. The faith of a child who believes her father is a superhero, who doesn't need to eat or sleep or ever feel afraid. A security guard made a slow pass in a small electric cart, his flashlight beam cutting a yellow swath across the concrete. Leo slouched down in his seat, instinctively trying to become invisible. The guard didn't even glance their way. His face was bored, his movements robotic, and the cart whirred past them and disappeared around a corner. Leo let out a breath. Hadn't realized he was holding. He needed to get them out of the car. If only for a few minutes. The cold was starting to feel dangerous, and the cramped space was making his muscles ache. He looked toward the glass doors at the far end of the garage that led into the hotel lobby. A warm yellow light spilled out, a beacon of comfort and heat. Just a few minutes, he thought, just long enough to feel the warmth on their skin, to let Maya stretch her legs in a place that he wasn't the back seat of a 20-year-old station wagon. It was a risk, but one he felt he had to take for her. The warmth of the lobby hit them. The moment the automatic glass doors slid open, it was a wave of quiet luxury, a scent of something floral and expensive, mingling with the clean smell of polished marble. The air was soft and still. The only sound, the faint whisper of a ventilation system and the distant clink of a glass from the bar tucked away in a bare, candlelit corner. Leo kept a firm hand on Maya's shoulder, guiding her gently inside. Her eyes were wide, taking in the soaring ceilings, the plush velvet armchairs arranged in conversational nooks, and the grand chandelier that hung like a galaxy of frozen diamonds in the center of the room. She'd never seen anything like it. Her world was playgrounds and public libraries, and the worn-out familiarity of their small 2-bedroom apartment before they'd had to leave it. All behind this was another universe. Entirely, Leo felt the immediate and prickling awareness of being out of place. His jeans were worn thin at the knees, his jacket was frayed at the cuffs, and his boots left faint damp tracks on the gleaming floor. He could feel the invisible line between their world and this one, as clearly as if it were painted on the marble. He guided Maya toward a small alcove near a towering potted fern, hoping they could blend into the shadows for just a moment, to steal a bit of warmth, before retreating back to the cold concrete of the garage. But they didn't go unnoticed. A man in a sharply tailored suit materialized from behind the front desk, his posture rigid, his expression a mask of polite disdain. His name tag read Mr. Sterling in crisp gold letters. He approached them with the silent, predatory grace of a man who enjoyed enforcing rules. His eyes did a slow, condescending sweep from Leo's scuffed boots to Maya's oversized coat, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on the smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Can I help you?" Mr. Sterling asked. His voice was smooth as silk, but the question was not an offer of assistance. It was a challenge. Leo straightened his shoulders instinctively, pulling Maya a little closer behind him. "We were just warming up for a minute," he said, his own voice low and steady, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "It's cold out." "Indeed it is," the manager replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "However, the lobby is reserved for registered guests of the Grand Zenith Hotel. Are you a guest, Mr. He let the question hang in the air, deliberately leaving Leo's name unspoken because it didn't matter. He was already categorized, already dismissed. "No," Leo admitted, his jaw tightening. "We're not. Then I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." "Mr. Sterling," said the politeness in his tone was a weapon, a tool to inflict humiliation without raising his voice. Leo could feel the heat rising in his own cheeks, a flush of shame and anger that burned behind his eyes. He opened his mouth to argue, to protest, to say something, anything. But Maya tugged on his sleeve, her voice a small whisper. "Daddy, is something wrong?" That was it. That was the question that shattered his anger and left only a deep, protective ache in its place. He couldn't have a scene here. He couldn't let her see the ugliness of this world, the casual cruelty of a man who saw them not as people but as problems to be removed. He forced a smile and knelt to her level. "No, sweetheart, everything's fine. We were just leaving anyway. Come on." But before they could turn to go, another voice cut through the quiet tension. A woman's voice, calm and clear, and carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "I believe they're with me." The room seemed to fall silent, every subtle noise amplified in the sudden stillness. Leo looked up, startled, and saw her. She was standing near the grand fireplace, her posture elegant and relaxed, a glass of amber liquid held loosely in one hand. She wasn't dressed in flashy jewels or a couture gown, but in a simple yet exquisitely cut pair of black trousers and a silk blouse. The color of deep twilight, her dark hair was pulled back into a low knot, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed not on Leo but on the manager. Mr. Sterling's professional mask slipped for a heartbeat, revealing a flash of genuine shock and panic. "Miss Vance," he stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. "I didn't realize these were your guests." She took a slow sip from her glass, her gaze unwavering. "That's because you didn't ask, you assumed." The rebuke was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Mr. Sterling's face paled visibly. He seemed to shrink a little under her calm scrutiny. "My apologies. Miss Vance, of course. Please forgive the misunderstanding." She didn't respond to him. Instead, she turned her attention to Leo. Her expression softened, though her eyes remained keen and observant. "I'm sorry for that," she said, her voice losing its sharp edge. "He can be overzealous in his duties." Leo was still on one knee, his mind struggling to catch up with the sudden turn of events. He didn't know who this woman was, but she had just commanded the room with a few quiet words. He stood slowly, pulling Maya close. "It's all right," he said. "We were just going." "No," she said simply. "You're not. You're staying the night as my guest." She looked down at Maya, whose wide eyes were now fixed on her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "I have a suite on the top floor with 2 bedrooms and a couch that's perfect for building forts. Would that be all right?" Maya's face lit up, her earlier fear completely forgotten. A suite with a fort couch. She looked up at her dad, her expression pleading. Leo was caught. His pride screamed at him to refuse to thank the woman politely and walk away with his Kropperman dignity intact. But then he looked at Maya's hopeful face, at the promise of a warm bed and a safe night. And he knew he couldn't deny her, that not for his own sake. He swallowed the hard lump of pride in his throat and gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." The woman smiled, a genuine smile that finally reached her eyes. "Good. Then it's settled." She turned back to the still flustered manager. "Mr. Sterling, please? Have the Zenith suite prepared for my guests and send up a room service menu. Anything they want on my account. Is that clear?" "Crystal, Miss Vance," he said with a jerky nod, all traces of his earlier arrogance gone, replaced by a desperate need to please. She turned back to Leo, her gaze lingering for a moment. "My name is Clara," she said, "and I'm very glad you decided to stay." The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was a silent ascent through a world. Leo didn't recognize the walls were paneled in dark, polished wood, and the air was scented with something subtle and clean like sandalwood, and Rain Maya stood in the center of the small space, her head tilted back as she watched the floor numbers light up, one by one, in a soft gold glow. She held Leo's hand in one of hers, and in the other she clutched a small complimentary chocolate that a bellhop had pressed into her palm. With a warm smile, Leo's own hand felt rough, and calloused against hers his knuckles were scraped from a botched engine repair the week before, and he could still feel the faint tremor of adrenaline in his veins. He was acutely aware of his worn-out clothes, the smell of the car that clung to him, and the $23 folded into a neat square in his pocket, a useless talisman, in a place where a single night's stay probably cost more than he'd made in the last 3 months. He felt like an imposter, a fraud, waiting to be discovered, and yet, when he looked over at Clara, standing quietly beside him, he saw no judgment in her eyes. She was staring straight ahead, her expression calm and unreadable, but there was a stillness about her that was less like indifference and more like a carefully constructed peace. He wondered who she was. Not just her name, but what she did. What had brought her to this hotel where she could command its staff with a single, quiet sentence. He wondered if she did this often, plucking struggling families from the cold and offering them sanctuary. But he didn't ask, he didn't have the right, and he was too afraid. The answer would only make him feel smaller. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a private vestibule with a single ornate door. Clara used a keycard and the door swung open, revealing the Zenith Suite. It was less a room and more an apartment. The entryway opened into a sprawling living area with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city lights. Twinkling below, like a fallen constellation, the carpet was so thick it muffled their footsteps, and the furniture was a collection of sleek modern pieces and plush inviting sofas. A fireplace flickered with a gas flame that danced over ceramic logs, and the air was warm, and still Maya let go of his hand and took a tentative step inside her mouth, a perfect O of astonishment. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice full of reverence. "It's bigger than our whole house." It was bigger than the 3 houses on their old street combined, Leo thought, but he just squeezed her shoulder gently. "It's something, isn't it?" Clara walked past them, her movements graceful and unhurried. "The master bedroom is through there," she said, gesturing to a set of double doors. "And there's a smaller guest room down the hall. You two can decide who gets which." She paused by the minibar, a sleek cabinet of polished wood and chrome. "I'll have them send up menus, but is there anything you need right away? A drink water for the little one?" Leo shook his head, still trying to process the sheer scale of the place. "We're fine, thank you." The phrase felt inadequate, small and flimsy in the face of such overwhelming generosity. Clara seemed to understand. She gave a small nod and turned to leave. "I'll let you get settled in," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "My own suite is just down the hall. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate." And then she was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind her, leaving Leo and Maya alone in a Gokeng Alone and Elan gilded cage, a palace they had no right to be in. Maya immediately ran to the window, pressing her hands against the cool glass, her face illuminated by the city lights below. "Look, Daddy! You can see everything!" Leo walked over and stood behind her, placing his hands on her small shoulders. The city was a vast, glittering tapestry, a world of movement and life and endless possibility. From up here, it looked beautiful, peaceful, not the cold, unforgiving place it had felt like. From the street below, he felt a wave of dizziness, a strange vertigo that had nothing to do with the height. It was the dizzying speed at which their world had just been turned upside down. One moment they were sleeping in a cold car, and the next they were standing in a penthouse suite overlooking the entire city. He didn't know what it meant or what would happen in the morning, but as he watched his daughter trace the path of a car's headlights with her finger, a small, perfect smile on her face, he felt a knot in his chest loosen just a little. For tonight she was warm, for tonight she was safe, and for tonight she believed in magic, and maybe just for a little while he could let that himself believe in it too. The room service menu was a bound leather book with elegant gold script that felt heavier than its pages. Should have. Leo sat on the edge of a plush armchair flipping through it while Maya explored the suite with the uninhibited joy of a treasure hunter. She discovered that the television was wider than she was tall, that the bathtub had bubbling jets, and that the closet had robes so fluffy she declared they were made of clouds. Leo's eyes scanned the prices, and a fresh wave of unease washed over him. A simple cheeseburger cost more than the cash in his pocket. A side of fries was the price of a half-tank of gas. He felt a familiar shame creep in a hot flush that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. He was about to suggest they just order a bowl of soup to share, when Maya came running back into the room, her face glowing. "Daddy, can we get macaroni and cheese and chocolate cake with extra cake? Sprinkles?" she asked breathlessly. Leo looked at the menu. Macaroni and cheese, $45. Chocolate lava cake, $32. He swallowed hard. Clara had said to order anything they wanted, but his pride was a stubborn beast. It recoiled at the thought of accepting such extravagant charity. He was a father. He was supposed to be the provider, the one who could give his daughter a piece of cake on her own terms, not as a gift from a mysterious benefactor in a penthouse. Sweet. He was about to gently steer her toward a more modest choice when her words echoed in his mind. "You're staying the night as my guest." "Anything you want." He looked at Maya's hopeful face, her eyes shining with the simple, pure desire for a childhood treat. And he knew he couldn't let his own hang-ups be the thing that stole this moment from her. She deserved this one night of feeling like a princess in a castle, even if the castle was borrowed and the king was a princess. "Fraud. You know what?" he said, closing the menu with a decisive snap. "That sounds like the perfect dinner." Her delighted squeal was all the validation he needed. He picked up the phone, his hand steady, and placed the order. His voice was clear and firm, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. When the food arrived, it was wheeled in on a cart with a white linen cloth and polished silver domes. A young waiter, with a kind smile, set it up on the coffee table with practiced efficiency. He didn't look at them with pity or curiosity, just a quiet professionalism that Leo was grateful for. The macaroni and cheese wasn't from a box. It was a rich, creamy concoction with a Provence Rotterdam place baked breadcrumb crust, and the cake was a decadent, molten masterpiece with a dusting of cocoa powder and a constellation of rainbow sprinkles. Maya ate with a focus and delight that made Leo's heart ache. She hummed as she chewed her feet, swinging happily beneath the table. Leo picked at his own food, his appetite gone, but he watched her every move, memorizing the look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. This, he thought, this is what matters later. After Maya was tucked into the impossibly soft bed in the guest room, fast asleep, with a faint smile on her face and a smudge of chocolate on her cheek, Leo found himself standing by the vast window. Once more, the city was quieter. Now, the river of headlights had thinned to a trickle, and the world below seemed to be holding its breath. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how he would face Clara, how he could ever repay a kindness so immense. But for the first time, in a long time, he wasn't just thinking about survival, he was thinking about hope, and it was a terrifying and beautiful thing. The silence of the suite was a stark contrast to the constant low-level hum of the station wagon Leo had grown so accustomed to. Here there were no rattles, no drafts, no engine ticks, reminding him of imminent failure. There was only the soft whisper of conditioned air and the distant muffled sounds of a city settling into sleep. He wandered through the living area, his socked feet sinking into the plush carpet. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of a marble side table, touched the velvety fabric of an armchair. It all felt unreal, like a movie set he'd stumbled onto by mistake. He couldn't bring himself to use the master bedroom. It felt like too much of an intrusion, a line he wasn't meant to cross. So he found a thick cashmere throw blanket draped over the back of the sofa and settled there. Didn't expect to sleep. His mind was still racing, a chaotic jumble of gratitude and guilt, but the warmth of the room and the sheer emotional exhaustion of the day began to weigh on him. His thoughts drifted back to Clara, her calm, authoritative presence, the way she had looked at him without a trace of pity. Her eyes were the thing he remembered most. They were sharp, intelligent, but held a deep weariness, a sadness that she seemed to carry with a practiced grace. Wondered about her story. What had made her so quick to see his own struggle, so willing to intervene? Had she known a life like his once? Or was she just a compassionate soul who used her immense privilege for good? He found himself hoping it was the latter. It was easier to accept kindness from someone who had always had it than from someone who had earned it the hard way, because that would imply a shared experience, a connection he wasn't sure he was ready for. He must have drifted off, because the next thing he knew, he was waking to a soft knock on the suite door. He sat up, disoriented, his heart pounding. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to streak the sky with pale pink and gray. He ran a hand through his messy hair and went to the door, cracking it open just enough to see. Clara stood in the hallway, dressed in simple yoga pants and a soft gray hoodie, holding 2 steaming mugs. "I hope I didn't wake you," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I was on my way to the gym and thought you might be a coffee person." "I am," he said, opening the door wider. "Thank you." She stepped inside, handing him one of the mugs. Her fingers brushed his for a fraction of a second, and a jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee passed between them. She glanced at the couch where his blanket was rumpled. "You didn't take the bedroom." "It felt like too much," he admitted, taking a sip of the coffee. It was rich and dark, and tasted like something he hadn't had in years. She gave a small understanding nod. "I get that." They stood in the quiet entryway for a moment. The city? Slowly waking up outside the window. She wasn't looking at him with the same intensity as the night before. Her gaze was softer, more hesitant, like she was treading on fragile ground. "I wanted to talk to you," she said finally. "If you have a minute before Maya wakes up." "I have time," he said, though his stomach tightened with a nervous knot. "What about?" "About what happens next," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "Because I don't think this should be the end of our conversation." Clara led him to the small dining nook by the window, a round glass table with 2 chairs that looked more like art than furniture. She sat down, placing her mug on a coaster with a soft click. Leo followed suit, taking the seat opposite her. The rising sun cast long shadows across the room, painting everything in a soft golden light. He felt exposed, vulnerable in the morning brightness, without the cover of night to hide his exhaustion and worry. He took another sip of coffee, needing something to do with his hands. He waited for her to speak, to lay out the terms of her charity, to tell him what she expected in return. He was used to transactions people didn't give without wanting something, even if it was just the satisfaction of feeling superior, but Clara surprised him. "I want to offer you a job," she said, her voice even and direct. Leo blinked, taken aback. "A job doing what?" "I own this hotel." She stated it as a fact, not a boast. "Actually, I own the whole chain of Zenith hotels." Leo's mind reeled. The sheer scale of that wealth was something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He thought back to her simple silk blouse, her quiet demeanor. There was no hint of the power she must wield. "We have an in-house engineering and maintenance department," she continued. "They handle everything from the plumbing to the HVAC to minor structural repairs. It's a good team, but we're short-staffed. Our chief engineer is a great manager, but he's overwhelmed with the administrative side. I've seen your hands. I saw the way you looked at the faulty hinge on the lobby door last night. You're a man who knows how things work, how they're built. I need someone like that, someone with practical skills, someone who sees the details." Leo was silent for a long moment, processing her words. A job, not a handout, an offer based on perceived skill, not on pity. It was a lifeline thrown with such precision and grace that it almost didn't feel like one at all. But he was still wary. "I don't have a degree in engineering," he said. "I was a line supervisor at a manufacturing plant. Before it shut down, I fixed cars on the side. That's it." "I'm not looking for a degree," she replied. "I'm looking for a problem solver. The pay is good. It comes with full benefits. Health insurance for you and Maya, and more importantly, it comes with housing. We have staff apartments in a building a few blocks from here. It's not the Zenith Suite, but it's safe, clean, and it would be yours. A home, a steady paycheck, health insurance." The words were a litany of everything he had been desperately praying for a foundation on, which he could rebuild their lives. It was too much, too fast, too perfect. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why me?" Clara looked out the window for a moment, her gaze distant. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible," she said softly. "And because your daughter deserves to see her father be the hero he so clearly is, I'm just offering him a place to do it." Her honesty disarmed him. It cut through his pride and his skepticism and laid bare the raw, desperate hope he'd been trying to suppress. He looked at her, this woman, who lived in a world of impossible luxury, and saw not a billionaire, not a savior, but someone who understood the weight of a life without ever having lived it herself. He didn't have to think about it. The answer was already there, lodged in his throat, a single word that held the promise of a new beginning. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll take it." The next few days passed in a blur of motion and quiet disbelief, a whirlwind of change that left Leo feeling both exhilarated and untethered. Clara was true. To her word, she handled everything with a quiet efficiency that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. By that afternoon, Leo had a meeting with Mr. Davis, the hotel's chief engineer, a kind, weathered man in his late 50s with calloused hands and a warm smile, who seemed genuinely relieved to have someone else to share the load with. He didn't ask about Leo's background or how he'd come to be hired by Miss Vance herself. He just handed him a set of blueprints and asked for his opinion on a recurring plumbing issue on the 12th floor. And for the first time in months, Leo felt a spark of his old self return, the confidence of a man who knew how to solve a problem, who could see the logic in a system and find the flaw. He spent hours walking the hotel's labyrinthine corridors, its cavernous basements, and its rooftop maintenance sheds, learning the building's rhythms, its groans, and its whispers. It was a complex, living organism, and he felt a strange sense of purpose in being one of its caretakers. While he was at work, Clara took care of Maya, a fact that filled Leo with a complicated mixture of gratitude and unease. He would return to the suite in the evenings to find Maya bubbling with stories of their day. They had visited the hotel's indoor pool, gone to the museum across the street, and had even had a tea party in the suite's living room with tiny cakes and a collection of Maya's stuffed animals. As honored guests, Clara was surprisingly good with her. She didn't talk down to her or shower her with expensive gifts. Instead, she listened to her rambling stories with genuine interest and answered her endless stream of questions. With a patient smile, Leo watched them together. A quiet observer in his own life, he saw the way Maya had started to relax, to bloom in the playful safety and stability of this new environment. But he also saw the way she looked at Clara with a kind of adoration that was usually reserved for him, and it sparked a pang of jealousy, a fear that he was being replaced not just as a provider, but as the center of his daughter's world. One evening he found them sitting on the floor together, surrounded by crayons and paper. Clara was helping Maya draw a picture of a castle. Her own strokes were hesitant and a little clumsy, but she was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You don't have to do all this," he said quietly from the doorway. Clara looked up, a smudge of blue crayon on her cheek. "I want to," she said simply. "She's an amazing kid." "I know," he said, "but it's not your responsibility." "Maybe not," Clara replied, her gaze softening. "But it doesn't feel like a burden, it feels like a privilege." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and Leo had to look away, because it was becoming harder and harder to maintain the distance. He thought he needed to keep between them. Their worlds were not just colliding, they were starting to merge, and he didn't know how to stop it, or if he even wanted to. The staff apartment was on the 5th floor of a clean, well-maintained brick building, 2 blocks from the hotel. It had 2 small bedrooms, a functional kitchen, and a living room, with a large window that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't the Zenith suite. But to Leo, it was a palace. It was a home. The day they moved in was filled with a sense of surreal normalcy. Clara had arranged for a delivery of basic furniture, a couch, a dining table, 2 beds with fresh new linens. There were no moving trucks, no boxes filled with a lifetime of possessions, just the few bags they'd been living out of, and a small collection of Maya's most treasured belongings, her stuffed animals, her favorite books, and the box of glitter crayons. She refused to go anywhere. Without Maya ran from room to room, her laughter echoing in the empty space. She claimed, the smaller bedroom immediately declaring it the perfect size for her and her animal friends. Leo stood in the center of the living room, a duffel bag at his feet, and felt a wave of emotion so profound it almost buckled his knees. A key in his pocket, a lease with his name on it, a door that locked from the inside. It was the kind of security he had started to believe he would never feel again. Clara had come with them to help them settle in a phrase that Leo found both touching and absurd. She, a woman who probably had a team of people to manage her own life, was currently on her hands and knees helping Maya arrange her stuffed animals on her new bed. Leo watched her from the doorway. Her movements were still a little awkward, a little unsure in this domestic setting, but her smile was genuine. Her laughter was real. He was beginning to see that beneath the polished exterior of Clara Vance, the billionaire hotel magnate, there was someone else. Someone quieter, more vulnerable, someone who seemed to be just as hungry for connection as they were. Later, after a dinner of pizza eaten on the floor because they hadn't unpacked the plates yet, Maya finally crashed in her new bed. Exhausted and happy, Leo walked Clara to the door of the apartment. The hallway was quiet, the air filled with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. "Thank you," he said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had for everything. "You don't have to thank me, Leo," she said, turning to face him under the dim light of the hallway. Her eyes were dark and searching. "This isn't a debt to be repaid." "I know," he said, "but it feels like one." "Then let me make a suggestion," she said, her voice soft. "Stop seeing it as a gift from me and start seeing it as something you've earned. You deserve a safe place for your daughter. You deserve a job where you're respected. You deserve to not have to sleep in your car." Her words were a balm to his bruised pride, a quiet affirmation that he had been fighting for. He had just been losing. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "How to just accept this." "You start by letting someone help," she said, "and you stop assuming they have an ulterior motive." She reached out, and her hand rested on his arm. For just a moment, her touch was light, but it sent a current through him that was both startling, strangely comforting. "Get some rest, Leo," she said before pulling her hand away. "You have a new life to build." And as he closed the door behind her, he had the unnerving feeling that she wasn't just talking about him. The first few weeks of their new life settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and foreign. Leo fell into his role at the hotel with a natural ease. He had a knack for diagnosing problems before they became crises, and his quiet, no-nonsense approach earned him the respect of his team. He found a deep satisfaction in the work in the problems. Tangible act of fixing what was broken, of making things right. Mr. Davis, the chief engineer, quickly came to rely on him, treating him less like a subordinate and more like a partner. They would spend hours hunched over old blueprints or troubleshooting a faulty electrical system, their conversation a mix of technical jargon and easy camaraderie. For the first time, in a long time, Leo felt like he belonged somewhere professionally. Maya started at the local public school just a few blocks from their apartment. She was a resilient kid, and she adapted quickly, making new friends and delighting her teachers with her bright, curious mind. Leo would walk her to school every morning, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. As he watched her run off to join her friends, her laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air, it was a picture of normalcy, so perfect it felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. Clara remained a steady presence in their lives, a quiet force moving just at the periphery. She never overstepped, never made them feel like they were a project. She would drop by the apartment on weekends with pastries from the hotel bakery or invite them for a swim in the hotel pool. Maya adored her, and Leo found himself looking forward to her visits more than he wanted to admit. Their conversations were easy, comfortable. They talked about his work, about Maya's school, about the simple day-to-day things that made up a life. He learned that she had a dry sense of humor, a surprising love for old black and white movies, and a deep-seated dislike for cilantro. She was slowly letting him see the person behind the name, the woman behind the wealth. But he was still guarded, still wary. He couldn't shake the feeling that their worlds were fundamentally incompatible, that he was a temporary detour in her life of glamour and power. He kept a part of himself, closed off a wall he had built, to protect himself and his daughter from the inevitable day when she would move on and they would be left behind. One rainy Saturday afternoon, she showed up at their door with 2 large bags of groceries. "I thought we could make a proper dinner," she said, shaking the rain from her coat, "something that doesn't come from a room service menu or a pizza box." Leo hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. "I'm not much of a cook," he warned her. "I can burn water." "Good thing I am," she said with a smile. "But you're on dish duty." They spent the afternoon in the small kitchen, their shoulders brushing as they moved around each other. She taught him how to properly chop an onion, how to make a simple vinaigrette from scratch. The room filled with the scent of roasting chicken and garlic and the sound of their easy laughter. It felt so natural, so right, that it scared him later as they sat at the small dining table, sharing the meal they had made together. He watched her as she talked to Maya about her day, and he felt something shift inside him. The wall he had so carefully constructed around his heart began to crumble because he was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, Clara Vance wasn't a visitor in their world. She was a part of it. The anonymous email arrived on a Tuesday morning, a single sentence in stark black font. "You might want to see this," followed by a link. Leo was in his small office in the hotel basement reviewing maintenance schedules. When it popped up in his inbox, he almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But a flicker of curiosity made him click the link, took him to a gossip website, one of those slick, predatory sites that fed on speculation and scandal. The headline was splashed across the top of the page in bold, sensational letters. "Billionaire hotelier, Clara Vance's new pet project. A single dad and his sob story." The article was a toxic mix of half-truths and invasive speculation. It had pictures, photos he didn't even know had been taken, one of him and Maya in their old station wagon in the hotel garage, another of Clara leading them through the lobby that first night, a grainy long-lens shot of him looking tired and disheveled, his face a mask of worry and shame. The writer painted him as a charity case, a down-on-his-luck drifter that the benevolent billionaire had scooped up for a PR stunt. It insinuated that their relationship was a carefully orchestrated fantasy designed to soften Clara's corporate image. It twisted every act of kindness into a calculated move, every genuine moment into a performance. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. His hands went cold. He read the article again and again, the words blurring together into a smear of poison. He felt exposed, violated his most vulnerable moments, laid bare for the world to see and judge the bride violate. Shame. He had felt that first night in the lobby came rushing back 100 times stronger. It was one thing to be struggling, it was another to have that struggle turned into a public spectacle, a story for people to consume and discard. He closed the browser window, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a surge of anger so intense it made him dizzy. Was this true? Had he been that blind? Had her kindness all been a lie? A part of him, the rational part, knew it wasn't. But the fear and the pride and the deep-seated insecurity that had been his constant companions for so long screamed at him that it was he, pushed back from his desk and stood up needing to move to breathe. He walked out of his office and up through the labyrinthine corridors of the hotel, not knowing where he was going, just knowing he had to get away from the screen, from the words from the sick. Feeling in the pit of his stomach, he ended up on the roof, the wind whipping at his face, a cold, sharp slap that did little to clear his head. He looked out over the city, a glittering expanse of steel and glass. It was her world, a world of power and influence and media, manipulation, a world he had no place in. He had been a fool to think he could ever belong here. He had let his guard down, he had started to hope, and now he was paying the price. The confrontation was inevitable. It happened that evening in the hallway outside his apartment. He was on his way to MES Down, pick up Maya from her after-school program. When he saw Clara waiting for him, she was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed her face, pale and drawn. She had seen the article too. He knew it the moment their eyes met. "Leo," she began, her voice soft. "I am so sorry." "Is it true?" he asked. His own voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a cold, hard shell around the turmoil inside her brow furrowed. "Is what true what they wrote? That all of this was a story, a project to make you look good?" Her eyes widened, in genuine shock and hurt. "No, of course not. How could you even think that?" "How could I not?" he countered, taking a step closer, his anger finally breaking through the surface. "Look at us, Clara. Look where we are. I'm a mechanic living in an apartment, paid for by a billionaire. You pulled me out of a parking garage and gave me a life I couldn't have dreamed of. It's the perfect sob story." "It's not a story," she said, her voice rising to match his. "It was a choice. I made a choice. Because I saw something in you, something in your daughter, something real." "Real?" He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "What do you know about real? Your whole world is curated and managed and spun for the press. You live in a penthouse suite and make deals that are worth more than my entire life." "That is not who I am," she shot back, her composure finally cracking. "That is a role I play. A cage I have been trying to escape for years. You, of all people, should understand what it feels like to be trapped." Her words hit him like a physical blow. Because he did understand, but he was too hurt, too raw, to admit it. "I don't want to be your escape, Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I don't want to be the one thing in your life that feels real, because what happens when you get bored? What happens when the novelty wears off? You go back to your world, and Maya and I are left with the wreckage of the life you built for us." "That's not fair," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I would never do that." "You don't know that," he said, turning away from her, "because people like you always have somewhere else to go. People like me, we just have what's right in front of us." He didn't wait for her to respond, he just walked away, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, the words hanging in the air between them like a shattered piece of glass. The days that followed were filled with a thick, suffocating silence. Leo went to work. He fixed what was broken. He went through the motions of his life. But the purpose and the satisfaction were gone. He felt like a fraud again, a man living a life that wasn't his. He was polite to Clara when he saw her in the hotel hallways, but his words were clipped, his eyes were distant. He had rebuilt the wall around his heart, this time higher and stronger than before. He avoided being alone with her, creating a buffer of work and responsibility that kept her at a safe distance. He told himself it was for the best, that it was the only way to protect himself. And Maya, from the inevitable pain of her departure, Maya felt the shift too. She was a perceptive child, and she knew that the easy laughter and warm camaraderie that had filled their apartment were gone. She would ask about Clara, her voice small and hesitant. "Is Miss Clara mad at us, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart." He would lie, his heart aching with the weight of it. "She's just busy." Clara, for her part, seemed to retreat into herself. The light that had started to return to her eyes had dimmed. She looked tired, again worn down by the weight of his rejection and the poison of the media's narrative. She didn't try to press him, didn't try to force a conversation he wasn't ready to have. She just gave him space, a quiet, respectful distance that was more painful than any argument would have been. One afternoon he was in the hotel's vast laundry facility troubleshooting a malfunctioning industrial dryer. When Mr. Davis found him, he was holding a tablet, his brow furrowed in concern. "You see this?" he asked, handing it to Leo. It was another article from the same gossip site, this one with the headline, "Clara Vance to step down as CEO of Zenith Hotels amid personal scandal speculation mounts that the reclusive billionaire is selling her stake in the company." Leo stared at the words, his blood running cold, stepping down, selling her stake. It didn't make sense. This company was her life, her legacy. He scrolled through the article, which was filled with quotes from anonymous board members and industry insiders, all expressing shock and concern over her erratic behavior. It painted her as an unstable leader who was letting a personal whim jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar empire. "It's not true, is it?" Mr. Davis asked, his voice low. Leo shook his head. "I don't know." But deep down, a sick feeling of dread began to pool in his stomach. He thought of his own words to her. "You go back to your world." What if he had been so wrong? What if instead of retreating to her world, she was choosing to dismantle it? He had accused her of being a tourist in his life. But maybe, just maybe, he had misjudged her completely. He had been so focused on protecting himself from her world that he had never stopped to consider what she might be trying to escape from it. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been so busy guarding his own heart that he had broken hers. He had to fix this. He had to make it right. He left the dryer, half disassembled, and ran through the hotel corridors, his heart pounding in his chest, a frantic, desperate rhythm. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew he had to find her before it was too late. He found her on the roof, the same place he had gone to escape his own anger. She was standing at the edge, looking out over the city, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She didn't turn when she heard him approach. She seemed to be expecting him. "It's a beautiful view, isn't it?" she said, her voice quiet, almost lost in the wind. "I used to think it was a sign of power, of success. Now it just looks lonely." "Are you really stepping down?" he asked, getting straight to the point. She finally turned to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. There were no tears. "The board is forcing my hand," she said. "They think I've become a liability. They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning to vote on my removal. They have the numbers. I'll be out by noon." "Because of me?" He asked, the words thick with guilt. "Because of us?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's not because of you, it's because of me. I broke their number one rule. I stopped being predictable. I let something human and messy into my life, and that scares them, because they can't control it. They can't put it on a balance sheet." She took a step closer, her eyes locking with his. "They think they're pushing me out, Leo, but the truth is I was already on my way to the door. I just didn't. I know how to turn the knob." "You were right about so many things. I live in a world of cages, gilded ones, but cages nonetheless. This hotel, this company, it was my father's dream, not mine. I've spent my whole life honoring his legacy, and I lost myself in the process." "Clara, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I was a coward. I let my own fear and pride blind me to who you really are." "We were both scared," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "You were scared I would leave, and I was scared you'd see the real me and not want me to stay?" "I want you to stay," he said, the words rushing out, a torrent of feeling he could no longer hold back. "I don't care about the hotel or the money or what anyone says. I care about you." He reached out and took her hands, his rough calloused ones enclosing her smooth, cool ones. "Let me fight for you," he said. "Let me come to that board meeting with you. Let me tell them what you did for me, for my daughter. Let me show them what real strength looks like." Clara looked at their joined hands and then back up at him, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You can't win this fight for me, Leo," she whispered, "but maybe, just maybe, you can help me win it for myself." The Zenith Hotel's boardroom was a cavern of polished mahogany and silent judgment floor. To ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but the atmosphere inside was cold and airless. The long table was surrounded by a dozen men, and one woman, all in dark, expensive suits. Their faces were masks of calculated neutrality, but their eyes held a predatory gleam. They were here for a kill. Clara sat at the head of the table, her posture erect, her expression calm. She wore a simple but elegant dress, the color of steel. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, betraying none of the turmoil that churned inside her. Leo stood just behind her, to her right, a silent sentinel in his work clothes. He had insisted on coming. Just as he was, his shirt was clean but faded, his hands were scrubbed, but the faint lines of grease were still etched into his skin. He was a deliberate and stark contrast to the polished world around. Him and his presence had sent a ripple of quiet outrage through the room. One of the board members, a man with a silver mane and a condescending smirk, cleared his throat. "Miss Vance, while we appreciate your flair for the dramatic, I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue to bring your staff." "He is not my staff," Clara said, her voice clear and steady. "He is my guest, and he is here at my request." The man sniffed dismissively. "As you wish, but we have a matter of some urgency to discuss, the matter of your leadership and the recent damage to this company's reputation." For the next hour, they attacked her. They came at her with numbers and stock charts and media reports they spoke of, shareholder confidence and brand integrity. They used words like erratic and irresponsible. They dissected her life, her choices, her character, all without ever looking her in the eye. Clara listened patiently, letting them exhaust their arsenal of accusations. She did not defend. She did not explain. She just let them speak their piece. When they were finally done, a heavy silence fell over the room. They all looked at her, expectantly, waiting for her to crumble, to apologize, to resign. "Are you finished?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a new weight, a steeliness that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Good," she said. "Then it's my turn." She stood up slowly, her eyes sweeping across the faces at the table. "You speak of brand integrity and reputation," she began. "But what you're really talking about is control. You're angry because I stepped outside the box you built for me, because I reminded you that this company is not just a collection of assets and stock prices. It is made up of people." She pointed a finger at the silver-haired man. "You talk about my erratic behavior, but you have no problem signing off on a plan to replace half of our housekeeping staff with automated systems to save a fraction of a % on your bottom line. Is that integrity?" She turned to another. "You lecture me on responsibility, but you were the one who pushed to outsource our call centers, laying off hundreds of loyal employees without a second thought." She went around the table one by one, exposing their own hypocrisies, their own moral compromises, their own betrayals of the values the company claimed to uphold. The room was silent. Now, the air thick with tension, the board members looked stunned, their masks of neutrality cracking under the force of her words. You are right about one thing, Clara said, her voice softening slightly. I have changed. I am no longer willing to be the face of a company that values profit over people, that prioritizes image over humanity. So yes, I will step down as CEO. Collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, but she held up a hand. But I am not selling my shares. I am the majority shareholder of this company, and I am not going anywhere. I am simply moving from the head of the table to a seat on this board, and as a board member, my first act will be to nominate a new CEO. She turned and looked at Leo, her eyes shining with a fierce pride. A man who understands the value of hard work, of integrity, of kindness. A man who knows how to fix what is broken, not just in a building, but in a culture. Leo's heart stopped. He stared at her in shock and disbelief. I nominate Leo Rhodes as the new Chief Executive Officer of Zenith Hotels. A stunned silence fell over the room, broken only by a choked laugh from the silver-haired man. That's preposterous. He's a mechanic. He's a leader, Clara said, her voice ringing with conviction. And it's time this company had one. It was a gamble, a wild, audacious move that no one had seen coming. The board was in chaos, but Clara had done more than just save herself. She had just started a revolution. The aftermath of the board meeting was a storm of frantic phone calls, hushed meetings, and a media frenzy that eclipsed the previous scandal, the idea of a blue-collar single dad being nominated to run a multi-billion-dollar hotel empire was so outrageous, so unheard of, that it became the biggest story of the year. At first, the board tried to fight it. They held emergency sessions. They threatened legal action. They tried to paint Clara as mentally unstable and Leo as an unqualified puppet, but Clara held firm. She used her majority stake with a ruthless precision they had never seen in her before. She reminded them that she still held the power, and she, too, was not afraid to use it to protect her vision and her choice. Leo, for his part, was terrified. He felt like a man who had been thrown into the deep end of the ocean without knowing how to swim. He spent hours with Clara in her suite poring over financial reports and organizational charts. She was a patient and brilliant teacher, explaining the complex inner workings of the empire with a clarity that demystified it. She saw something in him, a natural leadership, a 70s common-sense approach to problem-solving that he had never recognized in himself. You're not a CEO, Leo, she told him one night as they sat surrounded by stacks of paper. You're a chief engineer for the entire company. You're just fixing bigger things now. Slowly, with her guidance and his own quiet determination, he began to see it too. He started to believe that maybe he could do this not because he was a financial genius, but because he understood people. He understood the value of a job well done, of a promise kept, of a person treated with dignity. He started meeting with the hotel staff, not as a boss, but as a colleague. He listened to their concerns. He asked for their ideas. He learned their names and their stories. He earned their trust, not with his new title, but with his old-school integrity. The tide began to turn. A few of the more progressive board members started to see the wisdom in Clara's choice. They saw the positive response from the employees, the public, who were tired of faceless corporate greed and had latched onto the story of the mechanic CEO as a symbol of hope. The vote was close, a tense, nail-biting affair. But in the end, Clara's revolution succeeded. Leo Rhodes was officially named the new CEO of Zenith Hotels. The day the announcement was made, he and Clara stood on the roof of the hotel, looking out over the city, just as they had done on the day it all seemed to be falling apart. Are you scared? She asked him. Terrified, he admitted. But I'm not alone. No, she said, slipping her hand into his. You're not. They stood there for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and gold. The city below glittered with promise. It was still her world, but now it was his too, a world they were going to rebuild together, one honest day at a time. The transition was not without its challenges. Leo's appointment sent shockwaves through the industry. Wall Street analysts were skeptical, competitors were dismissive, and the media watched his every move with a critical eye. But Leo didn't try to be something he wasn't. He didn't adopt the jargon of the corporate world or trade his work boots for polished loafers. He brought his own brand of leadership to the company, one built on authenticity and common sense. His first official act as CEO was to cancel the plan to automate the housekeeping staff, and instead he gave them all a raise. He started a scholarship fund for the children of hotel employees, and he implemented a company-wide policy that promoted from within, giving long-term loyal employees a chance to advance. He was a different kind of leader, and people responded to it. The company culture began to shift from one of fear and competition to one of collaboration and mutual respect. Employees felt seen and valued, and that translated into better service and a stronger bottom line. Clara was his constant partner, his confidant, and his guide. She had taken a step back from the daily operations, but her presence was felt in every decision they made. They were a team in every sense of the word. Their personal relationship deepened as well. The walls between them had completely dissolved, replaced by a foundation of trust and mutual admiration. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, balancing the demands of their new roles with the simple joys of their life together. They had family dinners in their small apartment. They took Maya to the park on weekends, and they found solace in the quiet moments they stole for themselves away from the demands of their world. One evening they were sitting on the couch in their apartment after Maya had gone to bed. The city lights twinkled outside the window, a familiar and comforting sight. Leo was reading a bedtime story to Maya's teddy bear, a nightly ritual. He refused to give up, and Clara was sketching in a notebook. "What are you drawing?" he asked her. She smiled and turned the notebook toward him. It was a detailed sketch of a small community center with a playground, a library, and a daycare facility. "It's a new project I'm working on," she said. "The Zenith Foundation's first initiative, a support center for homeless families, a place where they can find a safe bed, a warm meal, and the resources they need to get back on their feet." Leo looked at the drawing, and then at her, his heart swelling with a love so profound it almost hurt. "You're really going to change the world, aren't you?" he asked. "No," she said, her eyes shining. "We are." He leaned over and kissed her. A slow, gentle kiss, filled with the promise of a future they were building together. A future that had been born from a single act of kindness in a cold parking garage. A future that proved that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who were just trying to find a safe place to spend the night. The Grand Zenith Hotel hosted its annual charity gala in the Grand Ballroom, a space that had once felt so intimidating to Leo, now felt like a second home. The room was filled with the city's elite philanthropists, business leaders, and media personalities, all dressed in their finest. But tonight, Leo was not an outsider. He was the host. He stood at the podium in a well-tailored suit that Clara had insisted he buy, his posture confident, his voice steady, as he spoke about the Zenith Foundation's mission and the new family center that was set to break ground. The following week he spoke not in corporate jargon but from the heart. He told his own story, the story of a father and a daughter sleeping in their car, of the shame and the fear and the desperation. He spoke of the kindness of a stranger who saw them not as a problem but as people. And the audience was silent, captivated by his honesty and his humility. When he was finished, the room erupted in a standing ovation. It was a sound he never thought he would hear, a sound of acceptance and respect. He looked out over the crowd, and his eyes found Clara. She was standing near the back of the room, a proud smile on her face. She raised her glass to him, a silent toast that said more than words ever could. Later, as the gala wound down, they stood on the balcony, overlooking the city, the cool night air, a welcome relief after the warmth of the ballroom. "You were amazing," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was just telling the truth," he replied. "That's what makes you amazing." She said they stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the endless river of headlights below. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked her. "The quiet? The simplicity?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I wouldn't trade this for anything. I used to think I had to choose between my world and yours, but I was wrong. We just had to build a new one together." He turned to her and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Clara Vance. I love you too, Leo Rhodes," she said, her voice thick with emotion, and as they kissed under the glittering canopy of the city sky, they both knew that they had found their true home not in a penthouse suite or a corner office, but in each other's arms. Place where two different worlds had finally and beautifully become one. A few years later, a new wing was added to the Zenith Family Center, a bright, airy space filled with books and computers and comfortable chairs. For reading, it was named the Maya Rhodes Learning Annex, a tribute to the little girl whose simple wish for pancakes had started it all. Maya now, a bright and confident 10-year-old, cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony, with her parents standing proudly. Beside her, she was no longer the small, frightened child from the parking garage. She was a happy, thriving kid who knew she was loved and safe. Leo had grown into his role as CEO with a quiet grace that had earned him the respect of the Portian entire industry. He was still the same man at his core, the one who preferred work boots to wingtips. But he now wore his title with an easy confidence. Clara had found her true calling as the head of the Zenith Foundation, pouring her energy and resources into creating meaningful change in the world. They were a power couple, not in the traditional sense of the word, but in a way that was far more profound. They had a partnership built on love, trust, and a shared vision for a better world. Sometimes on quiet evenings they would go up to the roof of the hotel, the same place where they had both faced their darkest moments, and look out over the city. They would hold hands and talk about their day, their dreams, their future. And they would remember the cold night in the parking garage, the night that had brought them together. They would remember the fear and the shame and the desperation, but they would also remember the kindness, the hope, and the magic. And they would be grateful for all of it because they knew that their story was not a fairy tale. It was something far better. It was real.